Please welcome Gerald Marzorati, General Manager and Editorial Director, The New York Times Conferences.
I did that little jump on stage because that's what people on television do. Good morning and welcome back to Food for Tomorrow. I want to start off day two by giving some thanks. I'd like to again thank our sponsors, our main sponsors, Chobani and the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance, which you just heard from, and Porsche. I want to extend a special thanks not only for their financial support, which was significant, but for their presence here. They were a big part and are a big part of this event. I also want to thank Owens, Illinois, RFX, and Syngenta for their support, and I want to thank our media sponsors, Food Tank and Food Tech Connect. I want to extend a very special thanks to Dan Barber for that revolutionary and delicious meal last night. Risotto was my comfort food when I was growing up, Italian-American, New Jersey, and I've had a week where I've needed some comfort. I want to thank as well the staffs of Blue Hill and of the Stone Barn Center, and the staff that I work with at the New York Times to produce conferences, and Long E, our conference producer. Together they've made this a special sort of experience. Mostly, I want to thank all of you for being here and for attending this event. Ultimately, when you're putting on a conference, you are the event. And, you know, walking around here during the day yesterday and wandering among the tables last night and overhearing the conversations, that's what makes a conference a conference, and it's been terrific so far. I'd like to also just make one observation, if I may, as we begin our second day. The folks working to change the food system are not battling farmers. They're battling agricultural methods, and there's a difference. And I've lived that kind of difference. When people say they hate the media, when people say they hate the New York Times, they hate the journalists, and they hate the columnists. Okay, and that and here and around the world, that hatred leads to intimidation, and it leads to jailings, and it leads to things worse than that. So there's a distinction I want to make there. Okay. If you were here yesterday, I spoke a little bit about change and how I see change as a journalist, and how change has a shape and a rhythm. And I suggested that the food system was being disrupted, and we're at the beginning of that change. And I mentioned as an example, as an analogous example, the collapse of Soviet communism and the rise of the legality of gay marriage. And, you know, when you're at the beginning, very beginning of any sort of change like that, there are lonely voices, right? And, you know, back in the 80s when I was an editor, I was publishing things by a Polish writer and thinker named Adam Michnik and a Czech thinker named Václav Havel. And this was before people were really had any real idea that the Soviet Union was going to collapse, right? And at the New York Times, I was privileged to publish essays by a writer named Andrew Sullivan, who was one of the first writers to actually broach the idea of legal gay marriage. And the people involved in trying to change the food system had those lonely voices too, right? People like Wendell Berry, and people like Wes Jackson, and people like Alice Waters 30, 40 years ago. And I'm so happy that some of these people are in our midst at this conference. People like Elliot Coleman, who I saw earlier, and people like Joan Gussow, and people like Marion Nessel. we're lucky to have these people. Do you think there'd be a more modern way to do this? See, that's very sophisticated. Because I'm on the board, of Stone Barns, I get to listen and learn from one of these people on a somewhat regular basis. I'm talking about Fred Kirschenmann. Fred has done a lot of things and has a lot of associations, but to me, he's a farmer philosopher of the first order. His essays, collected in a volume titled Cultivating an Ecological Conscience, are plain spoken and profound and deep in the American grain. Fred only talks about what he knows about, and what he knows about, he really knows about. He's going to be talking a little bit about himself and his farm, I hope, at my urging, and about the farming that goes on here at Stone Barns. Fred Kirschenmann.
Well, first of all, thank you to all of you for being here. These are conversations we have to have. And as Jerry said, and also my director said, they want me to talk a little bit about my farm, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing because actually, if you want to know more about my farm, it's been written about by a number of other people. Some of it's even on our website at the Leopold Center. But what I do want to talk about is how I got to where I am. And that really started on our farm. And it started primarily with my father and mother. You know, my father and mother started farming in North Dakota on our farm in 1930, right after they got married. And that was in the heart of the Dust Bowl. And those were extremely difficult times for them as beginning farmers. And somehow my father understood that the Dust Bowl wasn't just about the weather, which is what most of his neighbors thought. It was also about the way farmers farmed. He knew that somehow the way farmers had gotten into farming and leaving land so exposed to the vulnerabilities of this kind of weather event, that was part of the problem. And so he became a radical advocate of taking care of the land. And I can still remember him, by the time I was probably 4 or 5 years old, him lecturing me with his finger stuck out at me, telling me how important it was to take care of land. That was more important than making money. It was more important than how much you were going to yield on your farm. It was the most important thing, because if you didn't take care of the land, it wasn't going to take care of you. And that was his message. And that embedded in me a certain kind of value, which I could never escape. And I started, and one of the other things he was insistent on is I get as much education as I could, because he was denied that, so totally overreacted. So whether or not I would go to college was not up for debate. So I went to college, and then for a variety, I've never planned anything I've done in my life. It's always responding to things that come up. And I had these opportunities to go on to graduate school. And then with those credentials, I said, well, you know, I should probably use those, and so I decided a career in higher education, first of all as a teacher and then as an administrator. And during that time, I actually learned from a student about some of the benefits of organic agriculture. And that student had done he served as a student assistant to Warren Saws, who I think at that time was the first extension specialist to do some serious research in organic agriculture. And what he was interested in doing was finding out what would happen to soil. And I'm not saying here that organic agriculture is the solution to everything. As you'll find it in a minute, it's not. But what he was interested in was finding out if you managed soil the way some of the original proponents of organic agriculture used it, what would happen to soil under those circumstances compared to soil where you simply inserted the synthetic inputs. And of course, what they found is not surprising now. When you put all those wastes back in the soil, you manage the soil from what we've just heard from some of the farmers here this morning, then you're going to see some benefits to the health of the soil that you're not going to see if the only thing you do is insert those synthetic inputs. And so one day, David, my student, came in and he showed me photographs of 2 hands from the soil from these 2 different research plots. And it was like it was from different planets. Here on the left hand, his left hand was from that organic plot, which was dark and rich and porous, even earthworms dripping off from the edge of it. And the other hand was like a handful of sand. And I see my father's finger stuck out at me. Taking care of the land's the most important thing. So in 1976, when my father had a mild heart attack and his physician told him that he could still be a farmer, but that he had to get out from under the stress of managing the farm because it was too stressful in his heart. And so my family and I had some long conversations about what we were going to do. And we decided to go back to our farm in North Dakota and to transition it to an organic farm solely for what we could do to the soil and the health of the soil in our farm. I didn't even know there was such a thing as an organic market then. So we went back to the farm, and I thought I would do that the rest of my life. And of course, then in the early 1980s, when the whole sustainable agriculture movement started, because I both had academic credentials and real farming experience, I was invited to become part of the sustainable agriculture movement. And as a result of that, of course, that's the trajectory of the rest of my life. And, and part of that, then, becoming a part of that ended me up here at the Stone Barns. And I want to say a bit about why it's important for me to be here, even though I'm a farmer. But as I listened to the conversations yesterday and this morning, I think there's something that's not a part of the conversation yet that's, to me, vitally important when we talk about sustainability. And I want to add that to the conversation in my couple of minutes this morning. And that is that if we're truly interested in sustainability, we not only have to think about how we do things now, we have to think about the changes which are coming at us. And those are, I don't care if you're an organic farmer, a CSA farmer, industrial farmer, or whatever we want to call us. We have some challenges we have to face that I think we're not yet addressing. And if you want to, and I'm not the only one saying this, if you want to read a brief, short essay where somebody, for me also, articulated this so well, and that was, as you probably all know, the World Watch Institute does an annual report called State of the World. And the State of the World 2013 report, the theme of which was, is sustainability still possible? And the leading essay in that article was by Robert Eagleton, who at that time was the president of the World Watch Institute. And the title of his opening article was Beyond Sustainababble. I always thought that was a perfect term for much of what's going on in conversations around sustainability. Sustainababble. And the reason he used that term, he said that, he pointed out that most everybody is talking about sustainability in terms of how we fix the current system a little bit, you know, green it up a little bit, make it work a little bit better, and then everything's going to be fine. Amen, he said. And he said, what a state of dreamy belief, because we're not addressing the future challenges. So what are some of those future challenges? Well, I think as everybody knows, and again, whether you're farming organically or conventionally or whatever, we're all operating on the basis of some resources that we've all had. What are some of those resources? Well, cheap energy, for one. Ever since that first producing oil well in 1859, not that long ago, right, in Titusville, Pennsylvania, we've had access to very cheap energy because it's stored concentrated energy. And that era is coming to an end. Now, I know, we got more oil now than we've had in a long time, and even if you ignore all the potential downsides of fracking, we're producing all that oil, and we also think about the downsides of, a lot of people now who are studying this are telling me that we really need to keep the rest of the oil in the ground if we don't want to put more carbon into the environment, which essentially could make the planet uninhabitable for humans. So we have to at least pay attention to that. But nevertheless, at some point, this cheap energy is not going to be there. So one of the things I like to say to myself, in terms of my own farm in North Dakota, what if crude oil was $350 a barrel? Now, I didn't come up with that figure. T. Boone Pickens, who's an oil guy, right, in Texas, 2 years ago, he said we should expect that crude oil could get to $350 a barrel in 10 years, so that's 8 years from now. Now, I think he made that projection before he anticipated the amount of oil that we're now getting with hydraulic fracking. But nevertheless, at some point that will come. So maybe it's not 10 years from now, maybe it's 20 years from now. But even if it's 20 years from now, that's not that long for me to figure out how I'm going to operate my farm when crude oil is $350 a barrel, because someday that will come. And then we are depleting all of the essential minerals that we're using, not only in agriculture, but the rest of it in industrial economy. We now only have 4 countries that still have rock phosphate reserves, only 4 countries that still have potash reserves, and we're drawing those down. And Ugo Bardi, who is a scientist who published a new report now called Extracted, which has become one of the new Club of Rome reports. And he goes into great detail of all of these minerals that we've been depending on as part of these natural resources that we've all used, not only for our farms, but for our entire industrial economy. And he's pointing out how we're extracting all of these. They're going to be gone at some point. So what I want to ask myself as a farmer, suppose that crude oil is $350 a barrel, that we no longer have all these cheap energies, all the cheap minerals, including things like iron ore and copper, et cetera, which we use for all of our mechanization. And then what about the water? And we've talked about the water a little bit, but we're drawing down our fresh water resources all across the planet. In some lakes and streams have actually become totally depleted. They're dry now. And even the Ogallala Aquifer, which provides the irrigation for all of the heartland from southern South Dakota to Texas, and 2 recent studies, and we know we've already drawn it down by half since 1960, but 2 recent studies have indicated at the rate that we're drawing down the water now, there will no longer be any water in the Ogallala Aquifer 20 years from now. So I ask myself, let's assume that crude oil with $350 a barrel, that fertilizer costs are 5 or 6 times what they are today, that we only have half the amount of fresh water. And then you have to add in climate change into that. And climate change for agriculture and food systems are no longer something about the future. As the most recent International Panel on Climate Change report pointed out, it's affecting the food system now, because we're going to have more droughts, more floods, more severe weather events. And certainly every farmer in this room knows that ultimately the weather determines a lot about what we do. So if we want to be sustainable 20 years from now, these are the issues that we have to address. These have to become a part of the conversation. Now, how do we do that? Well, here I want to share some resources with you that I have found personally very helpful. One of them is a new book that's out now called The Big Pivot. And this book is written by Andrew Winston. Now, Andrew Winston is a business guy. He has a company that consults with major corporations, even corporations like Walmart and Unilever, et cetera. And what Andrew Winston is saying is that, and the subtitle of his book, what he means by the big pivot is that we all have to make a big turn now. We can't just continue to do what we've been doing in the past and just kind of, modify things a little bit. The subtitle of his book is Radical Practical Strategies for a Hotter, Scarcer, and More Open World. So as a consultant to some of our major businesses now, what he's saying is, look, if you want to be successful in the future, you got to make a big turn. You have to realize that we're going to be in a hotter world, that is, climate change is going to affect everything that we do. That it's a scarcer world, that we're using up a lot of the resources we've all gotten used to. They're not going to be there anymore. And that it's a more open world. So if any of you think that you can fix this problem simply by doing a better job of messaging, you're on the wrong side of history, as he puts it. Now, this is not some weird new agrarian farmer like me or some activist environmentalist. This is a business guy who's speaking to all of us in business, whether we're in the business of farming, the business of supplying inputs, the business of whatever it is that we're in. We have to make a big pivot turn if we want to be successful in the future. A second resource, which I find equally important, which is also written by economists to the business community is an article that appeared in the Harvard Business Review in January, February 2011. And if you want to read it, it's still available. And the title of their article, and this was written by two of our leading economists, Michael Porter and Mark Kramer. And they're writing this again to the business community, this article. And the title of their article is Creating Shared Value. Creating shared value. And what they say is that if you're in business and you're still doing business by what they call the old playbook, where you want to get your labor and your raw materials as cheaply as possible in order to maximize your profits within your own business, and you want to externalize your environmental costs and your social costs as much as possible to maximize your profits in your own business, you're not going to be successful in the future. Why? Because our labor and our raw materials have now become so deteriorated, you're not going to have the quality of those inputs for your business to be successful. And that our natural capital and our social capital has now become so compromised that you're not going to have those healthy, thriving communities in which to do your business to be successful. So you now have to do business based on a business plan that creates shared value. And this is at the heart of what Dan Barber was telling us about last night in terms of the work with the farmers that he's working with, in terms of sharing the value in order for both of them to be successful and thriving. And so these are, I think, the kinds of things that I want to suggest that if we want to be successful in the future, whether we're farmers or business people of other kinds or whatever it is that we're doing, these are things, I think, that as we think about, if we're interested in continuing to be successful 20 years from now, these are the kinds of things we have to do. And the reason that I spend part of my one wild and precious life here is because this is essentially what we're trying to do here on a very small scale. We are committed to be an education and demonstration site of how you can do agriculture on a basis that's essentially self-renewing and self-regulating. We don't bring a lot of inputs in from outside. All of the wastes that are produced here become part of the humus that goes back into the soil. And those of you who were on the tour yesterday at the greenhouse, you know what the health of that soil looks like. And it then produces the kind of incredible food that we ate last night. And so there are some very positive things here that we can do if we do this in the right way. And that's what I think, to me, I think one of the misconceptions that could so easily be done here is to see the Stone Barns as a kind of Disney World, great place to visit, because it is such a beautiful place. And I don't regret that we are that, but we're also doing some serious stuff here. And that is how to produce food in a way that comes out of a self-renewing, self-regulating system so that you can still do it when energy costs go up, when the mineral resources are no longer there, and when the water becomes scarcer. Because one of the other things that we know now is that when farmers manage their land to improve the biological health of soil, such as using cover crops, which is becoming popular now and a very important issue, that rainwater, where most of our soils now only absorb a half inch of rainwater an hour, the soil starts to absorb 8 inches of rainwater an hour. Now think about all of the things that we talked about, future challenges, just from that one thing. So restoring the biological health of soil, from my point of view, is one of the critical things we have to do. And then beyond that, we have to address these other challenges as well. So I'm hoping that those will become part of the conversation, and that if you want to learn more about, and I'm not saying that what we're doing here at the Stone Barns is going to save the world. We're going to be a small demonstration site of some of these alternative ways that we can do that. And one of the other things that excites me is that we have so many young people now who are not only interested in this, but learning from this and applying them as they go out to do their own farming. And it's one of the reasons that I'm here. So I hope that's helpful in terms of our conversation. Thank you.